Hello, and welcome to Art for All, the Sketchbook Skool podcast. I am Danny Gregory. I'm a writer and an artist and a guy who has this podcast with his pal, John Muir. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jack?
Sure. I'm the pal, John Muir, and I'm also a regular journal keeper, wildlife biologist, and I just have been really having fun with these discussions to kind of bat ideas around with another sort of fellow artist and thinker. So this is going to be fun today too.
That's kind of the idea. So a couple of days ago, I was walking my dog. We were going on a big long walk, and I was listening to my podcast app. And it's kind of set up so that like once you're done with a podcast and it ends, it like clicks to whatever's next in the line. And so I was finishing whatever it was, and then it clicked into this podcast, which I've never really listened to before.
How did we sound?
I was like, that's a pretty good podcast. And I listened to it for like the rest of the walk. I was like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. So I don't know, nothing like a little self-congratulations, but congratulations. I think it's not bad.
That's great.
Have you ever listened to it?
I haven't. I get to be there for our live thing, and
but it's different when it's like it comes on. It's like seeing your own book in a bookshop, right? I'm sure you've had that experience. You're like, oh yeah, there it is.
I know that guy.
It's like a familiar face. It's like seeing somebody you went to high school with or something, and you're like, oh yeah, there it is. How do you feel about when you see things that you've created in the past and you like haven't engaged with them for a while?
I think it's such a great opportunity to just reflect on sort of the fundamental ideas of growth mindset. So that you look at it like, wow, I was doing that. I finish a drawing and I look down and I go like, wow, that's the best drawing I've done. And then a little bit later, you look down at a drawing and you go like, wow, that's the best drawing I've done. And that means that other one isn't anymore, which means you've gotten better between then and now. And when you open up an old sketchbook, it's the same thing. So in terms of my art kind of critique, it's fun for me to see like, oh yeah, I wasn't really pushing values then, and then at this point I started doing that, and look, it makes the drawing better. But also because most of my stuff is journal entries and sketchbook and notebook entries, it's also just this invitation to revisit that moment and to think about what I was thinking about. And it's wonderful the way it takes you back so vividly.
Right. But what about, whoops, that's your phone. Let's pause for a second.
There we go.
So what did your parole officer want? Anyway, I think that is an interesting idea. I mean, I certainly don't have the experience of every drawing I do being like, this is the best drawing I've ever done. There's often like, this is the worst drawing I've ever done. Yeah.
But sometimes when you get that feeling like, wow, this one really worked, that puts I also want to acknowledge that, there's tons and tons of ones that I do like where that one isn't, and then there'll be times where you kind of go like where you're really trying to make it work and it does. And then that is then sort of for that point in my development.
Hold on a second. Good Lord. All right. That's my neighbor has a wood shop in his backyard, and every so often he just decides that he's going to build like a set of dining room chairs or something. I don't know what he's doing in there. Anyway, so going back to what you're saying.
Well, that yes, yeah. Every drawing isn't better than the next one, so it's this staggered experience. But sometimes when a drawing is really working for me, I'll realize that I'll look back at an old drawing and I'll realize that when I did that was the best drawing that I could do at that time, and I'm better now. and it's just neat to see how there's no point in your life where you're done developing this skill, where it's like, and there's the masterpiece and scene, because you're constantly newing learning new things and incorporating new ideas into the approach that you have. I love to see that reflected in my ability to draw, and uh, and again, it's just so much fun to be able to revisit those experiences in the past.
I also have what I call gross mindset, which is when you make something and you think it's gross. So you say, "Ugh, what? Like, will I ever do a good drawing again? Or
Hmm.
have I just, I finally lost it. I finally just, I'm done."
Well, and isn't it interesting that after all this time, and like people would say, well, Danny Gregory, he's the sketchbook school guy. You've got so many drawings under your belt that people would assume that that kind of that inner critic, you'd be somehow free of that, but you too have to face down that voice that sort of is telling us, that who do you think you're fooling, um,
Yeah.
and
And
get
sometimes
up and
deservedly
pick up your
so.
pencil again.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes deservedly so. I mean, sometimes, I mean, Michael Jordan, I'm sure, had off days. Everybody isn't, no matter how experienced you are, no matter what you've accomplished, you're not always there. You're not always present. Um, there are a lot of things that can get in the way. And, I mean, I think that is it's a struggle. I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly go through periods where I don't draw for a while, or
Yes.
I don't make anything, right? And if I do a drawing, it just seems like, oh, I just don't know if I want to face the fact that I suck. I'm just not in the mood today. So let me just like step away from it and forget the whole thing for a bit. And I mean, I recognize that that's me now, today, here, this person. It doesn't necessarily mean that I will be that person tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now. It's not. I don't know that that's growth mindset exactly. Maybe it is, but I think it's just sort of a recognition that sometimes you get up in the morning and your back hurts and your knees ache, and sometimes you spring out of bed. Who knows why? But it
Yeah.
happens.
And I think people assume that I draw every day, and that how but sometimes I don't, and sometimes there are, like you're saying, there are big spells where my journal just is sitting there. I think for me, probably part of that is kind of maybe more of a depression related thing, when my
Hmm.
it's hard to get myself to motivate to do anything creative or otherwise. And of course, it's the best thing that I can do is to kind of go out into nature and lose myself in a poppy. If I do that, that depression is probably going to lift. But depression has got its suit of armor on. It says like, no, don't go exercise, don't go do those things that are going to make this cloud lift. Um,
Yeah, I
that's
hope the poppy comment threw me. I hope that's not where you go to.
not that.
Oh, I
Yes,
see.
I see how that
Like,
could be.
dang. Like,
Um, no,
what is it called? Chasing the gong, hitting the gong, going to
no, no,
your
no, no.
local opium den. No, okay.
No, this would be rolling up on an Schultzia Californica with my sketchbook in my hand, and
Ah,
and drawing and sketching and observing it. And I like to go sketch poppies because I've sketched them so many times, and every time I draw them, there's something new that I'm learning about poppiness. And so it's a great way to um, it's a meditation in flower form, and they also move fast. Poppies can move fast, If
What do you
you
mean
are
they move?
drawing a poppy in the morning, you start your preliminary sketch and then you start going over that and you work out the details on that petal. Then you realize all the other petals have totally moved since the time that you started sketching. And then
Wow.
if in the afternoon they do the same thing, they all close up and they go whoop. So it's a
Oh,
that's a fast moving flower there.
interesting. Interesting. So, um, first of all, I wanted to say to people, we are okay. As what we normally do with this podcast is we set a theme and then we pursue it and see where it takes us. But today we've decided to do something a bit different, which is to just do more of a sort of miscellaneous grab bag kind of thing where we ask each other questions about whatever we want to. It's called Ask Me Anything. And I will ask Jack something and then it will be his turn to ask me something and we'll go back and forth that way. It's
Uh,
also your opportunity to ask us things too, because you can email us at podcast@sketchbookskool.com and you can ask us whatever you want. And we may or may not answer it, depending on how interesting a question it is. But if we do, we will answer it in a future episode. So,
okay, yeah, I
um,
was wondering how we're going to break the time space continuum there, but yes, a future episode we would be
yes, future
delighted to do
episode.
that.
So, yeah, so you ask us a question, email it to podcast@sketchbookskool.com. That's school with a K. And we'll see what happens. Okay. So, do you
So
want to go first or shall I go
yeah,
first?
well, just to kind of continue in this theme, sort of when you are off, what do you do to kind of get back on and into it?
Yeah, I don't really have a set solution. I mean, I find that a lot of it, as we were saying before, a lot of it has to do with kind of a larger mood. How are you feeling? Are you because when you're depressed, you can give in to depression, which
Hmm.
means that everything's
Hmm.
hopeless and pointless. But you can also sometimes say, you know what, the cure for depression is to break out of it. Well, not the cure, but a way that I deal with it is to just try and start doing something, doing something. And it can begin with looking at other artists' work, looking at a book that I haven't looked at for a while, looking at Instagram. But that can also work the other direction too, depending on your state of mind. It can make you feel even worse, right? When you say, "Oh, everybody's doing everything. They're all so great. They're so cool. I suck
They're
even."
sketching today.
Exactly. I suck even worse than they do.
Yeah.
So another solution is to do something completely other. You know, so writing instead of drawing.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and writing can sometimes be prey to the same demon. But then I find that stream of consciousness can help. Just doing like a morning pages kind of purging, sluicing out the pipes, cleaning, your depression by moving and making something happen. Taking a walk can help, but not
That's huge for
always.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, taking a walk can help, but I think a lot of the problem is the word should. Should you should draw
Hmm.
more. You should really be
Hmm.
drawing. Shouldn't you be drawing? When was the last time you did something in your sketchbook? Maybe you should do. Remember when you used to do a lot more of it? Maybe you should. All those kinds of shoulds. Like it can really rattle me when I'm like writing about something. I'm like, this fantastic thing. And then somebody will say, that sounds great. You should draw it. I'm like, what? I should? Yeah. I'm a guy who draws. Like I'm known for drawing. So I should really draw it. Like
Hmm.
I'm working on some
Hmm.
ideas for books right now. And I'm thinking I should illustrate them. Eh, but I'm really into this other thing. I'm into writing and thinking in writing terms. So no, I shouldn't. And I don't want to should anything. So I haven't really answered your question because I'm right now at a period where I do draw at least 2 or 3 times a week because I kind of have to because I should draw because I'm doing Draw With Me or Art Before Breakfast or some of the other things that I do. So I have to show up and draw. Like I can't not draw because that would be pathetic. So I do something and I draw, but I think probably the best solution is to just play, and that can mean just like getting out some non professional art supplies, crayons, big brush pens, maybe some gouache, and just slathering around and just kind of making some stuff. That can often break the spell by just feeling like, okay, I'm doing something. What do you do?
Just be a maker.
Yeah, exactly. Just make something.
Be a maker again.
Even
I
if it's
like that
something
idea.
lousy, even something lousy or something, whatever, it's just getting, it's
Mm.
kind of like
Mhm,
pulling
mhm.
that machine out of the shed, taking the drop cloth off it and starting it up and seeing, like, getting it going. What's your deal?
Well, you actually mentioned some of the things that work really well for me. Um, One is just getting outside, going outside. Um, Even better if I can go outside and get some exercise. And even better if I can go outside, get some exercise in nature. Just the sunshine, the vitamin D, feeling the warmth on my skin, um, getting my heart rate up, and getting my my brain uh, oxygenated, and then being in nature itself brings me into a state of calm. Just being around trees. It doesn't have to be in a national park. It can be in a little urban park. Just some little place where I can get near in the presence of natural things. And that for me really helps me change my state of mind. And then if I can get myself curious about something, that whenever I find a little mystery, I my instinct is to just grab my journal and go on a deep dive. Well, what's going on here, and try to figure it out, and try to put down as many clues as I can on a piece of paper. So if curiosity happens, then there's going to be journal pages that follow, and if journal pages are following, then I am probably going to get into a flow state and just lose myself in whatever is going on there.
Mhm.
So I let the curiosity sort of hook me into the journal.
I like that. I like that.
Another thing that I can do is, just sort of on that curiosity note, is that if I sort of onto a project where, um, you know, we've talked before about, I'm doing a deep dive on the moon. Um, and then it just sort of gets me out again and again and again, and I'm focusing on this project instead of whatever kind of inner angst I'm ruminating about. And the marvelous things going on with the moon then pull me out of that state that is wallowing inwardly and more rejoicing outwardly.
Yeah, I think the projects are really, really useful. I mean, I think because what they do is they overcome that first really large step, which is, what should I do? What should I
Mm,
do?
hmm
Right. So you can get out your art supplies and you can set them all up on your table, and then you're like, okay, now what? What do I do with it? When you have a project, you say, well, this is the thing that I'm doing. I don't need to think about that. And also, another thing about projects that I like a lot is no particular phase of the project necessarily has to be um, the most important one. Or, like, you can, in other words, you can screw up one phase or
hmm
one
hmm
step, right? So you can say, I'm going to draw, chickens every day, and I have a plan for it. Every day I go and I find a chicken, or I Google a chicken, and that's what I do. And then you do a chicken and the chicken is terrible. And you go, yeah, but I've drawn 50 chickens before, and I'm going to draw another 50 chickens. So, this one is fine. It's like, well, I have conversations like that with my wife where she'll say, that was a really bad meal. And I'll say, like, yeah, but it was just one lunch. Like, I don't care.
hmm
She'll say, but it's like, it wasn't, like, the bread wasn't really right. I said, I don't, like, I've eaten it. I'm moving on. And I think you can have that attitude towards drawing, which is like it's just a sandwich. You'll have other sandwiches. Some will be better, some will be worse. It didn't kill you, but at least you ate something. Move on.
Yeah, so I really like how you're framing that. So when you've got a project, this drawing is one in a process, and you're aware of that larger meta process, as opposed to getting focused on that chicken.
Right. Right. Yeah, because it's a project is about the accumulation of stuff a lot of times, right? It's about lots of different things. And if you look at if you had a gallery show where you showed 100 chickens, the point would be 100 chickens. It wouldn't necessarily, whereas if you had a gallery show which had one chicken in it,
It better be a good
then
chicken.
boy, that would have to be a hell of a chicken.
That's a hell of a chicken you've got.
Right, exactly. And so similarly, like when you're working on looking at the phases of the moon, I'm sure there's some days where like not much happens or you didn't really, notice anything
Hmm.
particularly interesting. And that doesn't
Yeah,
make the whole thing worthless, right?
that's right. There sometimes when I'm sketching the moon and I've got a circle with a line across it, basically showing the angle that the crescent was at, and there's no detail of craters or anything like that. It's just this sort of stand-in for what was the angle, what was the amount of the surface that was illuminated, and I'm done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm working on now is I'm trying to write little tiny books. So rather
Hmm.
than writing like the book, I'm trying to write like little tiny books and a book that could be maybe 20 pages long or, have just 4 or 5 kind of interesting thoughts in it and that be that. A book that you could read in, 20 minutes, half an hour. It's not a I'm not trying to write the book anymore. I'm trying to write just stuff that I find of interest now and to make them into books that anybody can just easily buy or not even pay for. That's another thing I'm trying experimenting with is don't books that are free or books that
Wow.
you pay whatever you want to for it.
Hmm.
That's what kind of amazed me. Like I just made this book and I put it out there and a whole bunch of people paid for it. And I was like, no, 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 it's a free book. But I gave them the option, like just because it was built into the platform that I was
Yeah.
distributing the book with. And I said, pay whatever you want. It was like just the thing. And so a lot of people paid for it. And I thought, wow, like that's a really startling thing. But it also meant that if I had written a book that's like, okay, this book is going to be like 1995 at Barnes and Noble, I would have been working on that thing for years. And I don't know that it would have been any better. And I probably don't think it would have been that much more fun than these kinds of little like mini books,
What was
and
your most recent mini book about?
so I just wrote a mini book and it's called Never Feel Guilty About Making Art. It was
Hmm.
just like some essays that I've written recently. I'm working on a book now called How to Learn to Draw and Why You Should. I have another book that I'm working on called The Seven Deadly Sins of Creativity. None of these are good enough or big enough or elaborate enough to actually be books that are published by publishers and do all that stuff. But they're just like, man, it's more than just a little essay. It's more of a bigger thought. So make it into a book. And then, the economic part of it will figure itself out. I don't care.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know so I don't know. I mean, I may sort of develop more elaborate things. I have a bigger idea, which is kind of an aggregation of a lot of things that I've been writing about, trying to sort of be a bit more systematic about that. But I'm doing it in part, this bigger project I'm doing in part because I want to see what it's like to have a bigger project and be organized in putting together this bigger project and see what that's like and if I like it. So like really trying to have a structure and really maybe getting feedback on ideas before I get too far in writing and kind of crowdsourcing response to um, half written, half drafts of things, just to see what that experience will be like, because it'll be very different than just dealing with a publisher,
Well,
So,
and what I like here is also just you are intentionally giving yourself all these different experiences. And I'm just sort of imagining like what that process is like in your brain. So you're doing quick books because quick books make you think in a different way. You're doing the big project book because doing the big project book will get you to think in a way that's different than that. and or from that. And I think very often sort of shaking up your mental etch-a-sketch like that is a good practice. You're out of there is no routine, and that does seem like a platform for some real creative outcomes. And also, like your this free book supported by people who can pay for it. That's sort of what I've been doing with my online classes at the start of the pandemic. I started teaching every week 3 online workshops, and they're we're all free. And I created a donation portal where people, if they were able to support me, I would say, please do. But if I know that a lot of people, like, people are losing their jobs, and that you really need some art and
Mm.
some nature time. And but what was so surprising to me is, first of all, how many people were kind of hungry for that kind of community, which you've probably seen also with Sketchbook Skool. Um, but also, all these folks stepped up to be patrons to support me doing that work, and it was it was incredible. And so that stuff is then it's out. Your book is then out there and accessible to anybody who needs it, and it also helps you then have the financial stability to for the next creative project and the next creative project after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a strange time for creativity because it is much, in some ways, easier to find an audience, right? As opposed to the days of publishing was the only way to get a book out there, or then you had to go on book tours and you had to go on the Today Show if you were lucky, and you went through all that process, and you're kind of beholden to this big corporation as to whether or not they decided you were worth investing in. And now you can just find people who like what you do, and you can share what you're thinking with them directly without having to have a middleman. But everything is free now. There's so much content that's free that don't people feel like they're overwhelmed but with content anyway. Right? They feel like I can't possibly read all the things I'd like to read. I can't possibly watch all the videos, listen to all the podcasts. There's just too much of it anyway. So, and that's the free stuff. So now you're saying, like, well, why would I pay for it? Why would I pay for stuff on top of it all? Because and like, is the paid stuff going to be better? Is that what it is? It used to be that, like, the publisher was the kind of gatekeeper that ensured that the stuff
Mm-hmm.
was better, but it isn't necessarily better. It isn't necessarily better. So why should I pay? Well, I think the reason to pay is in part because you want that person to make more stuff. It isn't
Yeah.
necessarily because you feel like you have to pay for it in a quid pro quo. I pay you for this thing, you give me that thing. That's the normal capitalist transaction, right? As
Right.
opposed to, I pay this so that because A, I want to show you that I support you, and B, I want to tell you that you should do more of this. And this is a way of me doing that. C, I want to be engaged in it, right? When you contribute to an artist, you're a participant in a way in that process, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
In a way that's very different than just like a thumbs up, a like on social media that costs you nothing. You're saying, like, I'm willing to make a little bit of a contribution to this. And I think that then
Mm-hmm.
the artist feels like, oh, like somebody cares about this. Like, I'm not just doing this, in a vacuum. So it isn't necessarily that the artist is going to make enough money to live exclusively on that, but it's a way of voting in a sense. But I think we've gotten so out of touch with that. I mean, I have so many people who write to me who say basically, "How dare you charge for what you do? I can get all this stuff for free." And I
Mm-hmm.
say, yeah, I guess what I'm realizing in that is I'm not making this for you, I guess.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Those people out there I think they're looking at it the wrong way. The well, there's a value judgment. That's interesting. Um, I think those people are looking at it in a way that doesn't build them, connect them to community,
Yeah.
and there's and is outside of a relationship. And so um, there's the relationship that is um, that there's some things that you have to pay. You've got to pay your taxes. There are some things that you choose to uh, to pay for, but if you want those things, you have to pay. It's a book that costs this amount of money, and then there is the person who is creating things, and it's valuable to you, and you choose. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to support her, and I am going to. I think it's wonderful that this is, because this is something that I want to be in the world with me,
Right.
and there's then a relationship between you and the artist, and it's by choice. It feels really different than if I have to pay this amount to get your album. It's that I am choosing to um, I am I'm choosing to be in a relationship with this person. But then you also want to, if that person is um, doing things that really light up your world, to think of like, how can you continue to support that person. So sometimes we feel good, I make a one-time donation to something. um, it's but if I want that relationship to perpetuate, if I'm able to, um, I want to go back and be and support them another time in another way, and then another time in another way, or maybe the same way. um, so I am I able to be there long term for these things that I value, and something that has just been so inspiring to me in just sort of what I saw with the response to the work, the creative work which I was putting out during the pandemic, is that people stepped up into that space and they supported me, and they've continued to do it. Um,
Yeah, and your supporters become a factor in what you make. Like, in other words, because you know that somebody's out there who likes what you're doing, is gaining something from it, it motivates you to make more of it.
mhm,
You're
it
also
does.
getting feedback from those people as to what they like more and what they want you to investigate further.
Hmm.
And you're
Hmm.
also getting, you're also noticing what gets less response. So that's certainly a thing. But I think certainly when people vote with their pocketbooks, it helps. It's not you just feel like they maybe are a bit more meaningful in their support. But I also don't want to make it about money, because I certainly have a lot of people who say to me, "I don't have the money to give you anything," and I'll
Yeah.
say, "But I like you anyway," and I'll say, "Okay, well, I'm not going to not give you stuff because of that. That would be right. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say, well, you know, if you can't pay, I'm sorry. That's just the way it's going to be." I think it's more like if you look at like public radio or public television, they'll do those intolerable fund drives every so often where they're giving you a tote bag and they're going on and on and on and interrupting their regular programming to beg for money. And it's just, and then I think their thought is like, okay, eventually you're just going to give in and give us some money. But and I assume that it works because they keep doing it, right? And I'm sure they've had a lot of sort of consultants come in and say, "Is that the way? Is this the best way to raise funds?" But I think they're also trying to say, "This is your station. This is
Yep.
your station." That's and that's
And
why,
to remind us of that relationship
right?
between the product that they're creating, the creative product, and that patronage. And that is something for both the creative and the patron to sort of to remember. And the but as you're saying that, also there are people that cannot afford to give you a financial gift. So it's one of the really wonderful, meaningful um, parts of this experience for me has also been when I've talked about sort of fundraising things. I've said um, to my community, like, if it's possible to support me, doing this, please do. Um, uh, but if you're not able to do this at this time, please consider doing an act of kindness or of stewardship in your community or your environment that you otherwise might not have done because of the value that you're getting from this. And
I like
I've
that idea.
gotten
Yeah.
it's beautiful. I've gotten letters and emails from people that are just sort of saying, here's I don't have money to support you. The stuff that you're doing is really valuable to me, and I just wanted you to know that this is something that I did because you're doing this. And people will. There's a picture of this family standing on a beach, and they've got these sacks of trash that they've picked up because they enjoyed and got value out of the nature journaling program that I was doing. Um, there's another person told me of, because of this, uh, she had essentially adopted an elder down the street during the pandemic and was doing all her grocery shopping for her, and that sort of discussion that we'd had on one of uh, these forums that I was teaching sort of made her think about that relationship, and she decided to do that. That that for me is huge.
Right.
That's amazing. But so an act, and then think of the relationship between that patron and that artist. That artist then inspired that person to go do something kind and beautiful that otherwise wouldn't have happened, and the world just became a better place because of that. That's huge.
And I think the flip side of this is art for too long has been the domain of the rich and the powerful. Wealthy people are the people who
Mhm.
buy art. Through the history of at least the last 500 years of civilization, the church, government, those are the things that funded artists, right? Not the average person. So when artists make art, that's who they're thinking about. Like, it's always bored me to go to a museum and you see a few galleries full of portraits of
There's so many of
Flemish
those.
burgermeisters, or
Yeah.
sort of self-satisfied looking wealthy Dutch people from the 18th century that were the subjects of the great artists, because that's who that's who they painted. So you look at this work and you go, okay, here's a painting that has been in a museum now for a couple hundred years. It was in this rich person's house. It ended up in a museum. This museum is going to protect it and preserve it for future generations. And it's a portrait of some fat rich guy who was able to hire this artist. And so he now lives on in history. Like, that is what he got for his investment. And there haven't been a lot of artists, like Bruegel, let's say, who actually depicted the lives of regular people. But art has
Potato
always
eaters.
been, yeah, art's been made for, yeah, or kings, right? You see portraits of kings, and so art was the domain of the wealthy and or of the church, which is also another way of talking about power. And it's that's what artists had to do. That's what they've had to do. I would think that we're beyond that. I mean, now you can go to a museum and you can see all this art that was locked up behind the castle walls, but you may need to pay $25 to go and see it, right? A ticket
Hmm.
to a big show at a big museum is now a really expensive thing. I don't know when that started, not that long ago, when suddenly that became again a domain of privilege. But, I think that the internet has democratized art more
Hmm.
so, you know. So it is possible for an artist or a musician or a writer to just deal with the people who care about what they do and not deal with some intermediary power structure, you know, that you can have a one-to-one relationship. And I think that that changes the art that you dare to make, because I think that if the only people who will pay you to make paintings are rich and powerful people, surely the fact that that's your subject is going to restrict you in some way,
Yeah,
right? You're
that's
not
right.
going to be, there's things you don't make paintings of because nobody wants to buy that. Nobody wants to buy the things that may be the truly meaningful things to you, the things that you actually have to express something really powerful about. Because honestly, if you're, painting wealthy society people, I don't know how deep your feeling is going to be about that. And that's going to limit the art that you're making. So again, it's not universally true. And I know that if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking I can think of 1,000
Oh, sure.
exceptions to this. But I think this is the essential part of it, which is that if artists can make art about the things that truly mean something to them, it will mean something to the people who look at the art too. And they will be conveying messages that are much more of a revelation than how they feel about some woman in a big dress.
Yes. And then I would also add to that the idea of um, something that a lot of your work as well of mine is devoted to is the is not just that creating art to create a product, but that process itself of creating art is intrinsically valuable, and we want to make that experience also more accessible to everybody. So not only is art itself, the products of art are more accessible out there, but that we want to invite people into the process of making art, because that truly transforms how we see, how we think, and is a the process itself is an intrinsic value.
Yeah, I think the art world, capital A, art world, galleries, museums, wealthy people, their interest is scarcity in art. They want
Mhm.
art to be a commodity which has value because of its rareness, right?
Yes.
There's only so many paintings by this artist. There's only so many artists who have gotten to the point where they can have a gallery show. They want to treat it like a rare commodity. And so they're not interested in you making art, right? They're not that is a hobbyist. That is,
Hmm.
folk art. That is, outsider art, all those kinds of pejorative terms that are applied to it. The idea that, and so, but they've also set the terms by which we judge art. So if you say to somebody says to you, "What are you?" and you say, "I'm an artist," they'll say, "How much do your paintings sell for? What gallery are you represented by? Where would I go to see your work?" None
That's
of
right.
which has any relevance to the fact that you're an artist. If you write a book and you say, "I'm an author," oh, really? Did you write a bestseller? Where would I buy your book? What do you write books about? Those kinds of questions are all dictated by this structure that says, um, you know, we need to pigeonhole you and we need to put a price tag on what you make in order to give it validity. And, we can take that back and we can say, no, that's that has nothing to do with why I do what I do. So democratizing the making of art as well as the
Yep.
distribution of art is something we now have the power to do. I mean, I sound like I'm sort of at the barricades and, some kind of like long haired freak sort of rallying people against power structure. That's not really my point. My point is that making art is a great way of being happy, a great way
Yes.
of dealing
Yes.
with
Well said.
right? Yeah. So why should that be the domain of the few? Why can't we all do
Yeah.
it? Every 6-year-old kid does it. Why can't every 60-year-old man do it? Why can't we all make art and not be in any way restricted by this irrelevant marketplace and that marketplace extends to art schools, writing schools, publishing houses, all those things, and says, we're going to have all kinds of gatekeepers that are going to decide whether or not somebody has the ability to do this thing or not, or is going to be granted that permission. It's nonsense. You can pick up a pencil and you can draw. You don't need permission from anybody.
Uh, I I wholeheartedly agree with that. So that it's not um, it is not the product. Um, I would say that the product. Let's define it by the process. That you're an artist. If you if you if you pick up your journal and you make some art, and it's what then qualifies as art. There's let me be intentionally circular here. So then what is art? Well, that's the stuff that is made by those artists over there arting. And but it's that process that's the critical thing. And so don't think that my product doesn't meet some standard. Um, and therefore isn't art. Oh, I'm just a dabbler. Oh, I'm not that, oh, you're doing art. That's you're now, let that be who you are, what you're doing, and don't have some kind of criteria for um, what uh, what is or isn't. But I would say give yourself, maybe there's some mindset things in here. What then is an artist? Well, it kind of the end product that you're making, I would say, has less to do with it. um, I would say more of those processes themselves of, you are venturing into this skill that is expanding, and it's expanding you. um, what how would you define the this art making process? Have you ever defined it?
Well, it's funny because I was reading this book this weekend, which I which is called "The Art of Asking" by Amanda Palmer. It's a fairly well known book now. She gave a famous TED talk. She's a musician who's with a band called the Dresden Dolls, and she wrote this book, which is about how artists are hesitant to ask.
Mm-hmm.
It somehow seems to subvert what they're doing, that they're ashamed to ask. And she says, I just want to read you a little piece of this book. She says, you may have a memory of when you first, as a child, started connecting the dots of the world. Perhaps outside on a cold spring day school field trip, mud on your shoes, mentally straying from the given tasks at hand as you began to find patterns and connections where you didn't notice them before. You may remember being excited by your discovery, and maybe you held them up proudly to the other kids, saying, did you ever notice that this looks like this? The shapes of this leaf look like the cracks in this puddle of ice, which looks like the veins on the back of my hand, which looks like the hair stuck to the back of her sweater. Collecting the dots and then connecting them, and then sharing the connections with those around you. This is how a creative human works: collecting, connecting, sharing. And then she goes on to say, the impulse to connect the dots and to share what you've connected is the urge that makes you an artist. If you're using words or symbols to connect the dots, whether you're a professional artist or not, you are an artistic force in the world.
Wait, say that again. Say that last line again.
She says, if you're using words or symbols to connect the dots, whether you're a professional artist or not, you are an artistic force in the world. So basically, artists are people who notice and make connections. So you could be a stand-up comedian. You could be somebody who's a writer. You could be a filmmaker. You could be a musician. Well, those could just be parts of your life. You could be just a person who notices things, and that is a form of art as well. It has nothing to do with whether it's bought or sold. It's to do with how you see the world, that you notice that it is all integrated, that there are similarities, there are connections. I mean, we were having this conversation a few episodes ago about creativity in nature. And, to me, like particularly when I'm writing, I like to come upon ideas and then form connections between them and then kind of illustrate them with my own experiences and try and just draw themes together that make life richer, make you realize that there's patterns to things, that there's similarities, that there's the lessons that are learned in one part of the universe somehow apply to things that go on in a very different part of the universe. Noticing that, and that delight that you get, that charge you get out of saying, like, it's kind of like this. Like, to me, it's like metaphors. I love metaphors and analogies. I
Mm-hmm.
think that you're just, instead of just living life as it comes to you, you are weaving it together and you are making something of it all. And that's what makes art. Now, do you have talent for that? I don't know. There's just so many things that just have nothing to do with that, but it's a really delightful experience. And you'll see it when you hang out with a little kid and they ask you all these questions because they're noticing this stuff, right? They're noticing things and they're discovering it for the very first time. This world that they've suddenly been dropped into, they're seeing these forces, they're seeing these structures, and sometimes they're wildly imaginative and they're really delightful in that. That's why we laugh, right? That's why we laugh at a joke, because so often a
Mm-hmm.
joke is what it really is somebody noticed something, and
Yes.
we laugh with the aha awareness of, like, oh my god, that's totally true. I
It's
never
that
thought about that.
recognition of a pattern that's been hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, and we say, like, that's I love that you noticed that,
Yeah.
and that really makes me happy.
So
Yeah,
that you have collect, connect, share.
yeah,
That
and the sharing part of it's super important, right? Because when you share it, you're allowing other people to find that same connection and then to maybe add to the connection and take it further. It's an essential part of what we do.
the with the connecting part, what you're describing as sort of the weaving together of these strands, um, and finding those relationships. In that's I've tried to build that into kind of the intentional process of my nature journaling. So I have my kind of nature journaling mantra is: I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of.
Mhm.
And that it reminds me of piece is intentionally sort of thinking about what in your lived experience or things that you have read or seen before or saw in a gallery or noticed on from the cracks in the mud to the veins on the back of the hand. What is already kind of hooked into your gray matter that one way or another relates to this new experience that you're having, this new phenomenon that you're seeing? How can we tie that in, and being deliberate about looking for that and putting that in your journal? So hunting for those pieces and intentionally putting those in. Um, so it's really interesting that this definition has that connecting as this critical part of this process. Um,
Because isn't that part? I mean, isn't that what the purpose of our lives is, in a way, is to understand what's going on, what we're experiencing, to make connections between things, to advance our own knowledge, to maybe advance the knowledge of our children and the people around us, to figure things out, to solve things, to go, oh, this does this, so therefore it must be that. That's how things move ahead. That's otherwise we're just passive. We're just here being fed, the whatever it is, and we're not questioning, we're not exploring, we're not delighting. That's the delight of discovery. And if we avoid that, then we're also taking away an important survival tool from ourselves, which is the ability to solve problems. And you solve problems by noticing things,
Mm-hmm.
and forming new connections that could lead to a new situation. But if you can't solve problems, how are you going to survive? That we are the descendants of people who solve problems. So therefore it is hardwired into us. Those of our forebears who didn't solve problems didn't survive. So it's a really important part of who we are. And I think that that's what we do as artists. Like, that's why this
Mm-hmm.
circumscribing this class of artists is so meaningless, because it's in all of us. It has to be, or else we wouldn't be here.
You're talking about deliberately seeking relationships in everything that you're looking at, and so too with others. Those relationships. The older I get, the more I see that it's the relationships between us and among us, um, that are what brings so much richness into this world. And so when you're intentionally looking for those things, um, you will encounter them more. So if you've got a search image and you're kind of going like, what's the relationship? I'm looking for relationships, patterns. How are these things connected? Yeah, we may find some false patterns that aren't there, but we're going to, hopefully we're going to start to weed some of those out. But if we're intentionally looking for those connections, we have a better chance of encountering them and seeing them than we otherwise would. The
Yeah.
that and just sort of bouncing back to this collect, connect, and share idea. That tell me the name of the book and the author one more time.
So the author's name is Amanda Palmer, and she is the book is called The Art of Asking. She has a TED talk that is worth watching. And
Okay.
in this TED talk, she talks about how she actually began as a street performer. She was one of those living statues,
Mm-hmm.
and then she would basically get money from passersby for what she was doing. And she then became part of this very successful band, and she was tied into the whole thing we were talking about before, these intermediaries, the music industry, the concert stadiums and all that stuff. And she decided that she wanted to break away from it, and so she started to say to her fans, um, just give me money and I'll make this stuff. And a lot of people said, well, you're a wealthy, successful musician. Why should we give you money? The people who knew her and loved what she did said, we are going to support you in this, and recognize that in that freedom that we're giving you and in that support we're giving you, that validation becomes an ingredient in the art that you make that we love.
Mm-hmm.
And but she talks about how difficult it was to ask and how suspicious people are of people who ask, particularly in the creative world.
Yeah.
You know, like you would never go to a lawyer and be surprised when they said this is what it's going to cost you,
Right.
right?
Right. But
And you wouldn't go into a store and just wonder what these numbers are that are written on the things that are for on display. You understand that these
yeah. Yep.
transactions, but in the world of art, we've screwed that up,
Yeah. That's
right?
right. The idea is you're there. Here's it's this false dichotomy. Um, you should you're either a starving artist or you're a sellout.
Right.
And so if you're financially successful, then you're doing it wrong, because you should be more hungry. Um, but
Yeah.
there's another. I'm bouncing back into Palmer's triad here for one more time. This collect, connect, share. When you're reading that, it reminded me of this very short poem by Mary Oliver. It's just 3 lines. Interestingly, a triad. But look at the connection between this. This is this little poem that she has called Instructions for Living a Life. It's just 3 lines. It's pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So
Same thing.
yeah, it's the same thing. So pay attention is collecting. So you're collecting, you're paying attention to these things. You're collecting these phenomenon by the act of deliberate attention. You're collecting those. You are connecting the dots, and that's what makes you realize that there's something wonderful happening in front of you. Be astonished. Tell about it. To share that with those connections, and the wonder and the beauty of that with other people. Tell about it. That's the share. So pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That's the poem Instructions for Living a Life by Mary Oliver.
And you
That's
think about how essential, how it makes sense that, you know, that when we were living in more primitive forms of society, every single person in the society had the responsibility to notice what was going on around them, right? To see what the animals were doing, what the weather was doing, to pay attention, to be alert, and then to come to some conclusion about what they've seen, and then to share it, right? I mean, that's without that we wouldn't exist. It's a really, really essential thing, and we do it all the time when we're talking, right? We have conversations with people. We're always doing that, and art is just another form of that process, right? It's a more pointed, it's often a more graceful and beautiful and nonverbal way of doing that, but it's so essential and so similar that we need to, but we're not explicit about it because we think it's the domain of a certain class,
Mhm.
and you wonder what we've
and and
missed
and
because of
so
that.
yeah, it's not some rarefied domain. It is a tool for embracing the world. It's a tool for paying attention to the world. It's a tool for letting yourself be more permeable to the wonder, the beauty, sometimes the horror of what is real, going on around us. And as you said, that just adds depth and beauty and joy to our lives. The creation of that, as well as um, the creation of that, as well as the uh, the the product itself. But I would say most importantly, the creation.
So that process, so living in that process, being in a process of gathering, connecting, sharing, gathering, that's, it's not about the final bit of information that you shared necessarily for us as artists, right? It's about this constant process of living and being. And what did Mary Oliver call it?
Instructions for living a life.
A
So
life, just living a life, not a good life, but just like that's what it is.
yeah,
Like that's what you do. That's what you do. It's really that simple. Interesting.
it's that
Well,
simple.
I feel like do you have any final thought?
Well, no, just I was agreeing with you. It's like this poem, that part of it is what's arresting about it is its brevity. It's so
Right.
short, as if she's just sort of saying, here is. I'm just going to boil it down here. and
And I think that that is part of the art. What artists do also is we are interested in form, right? So we try to make things, we polish, right? We don't just dump everything we find out there. We draw connections, but then we polish it, refine it, and try to make it succinct, to give it a hook, to make
Mhm.
it have power, the power that comes from, deliberating on it and honing it. That's kind of what our job is, in a way, and coming up with ways of sort of really making these observations feel essential and feel global, right? Making them feel bigger and more polished at the same time. Yeah. Well, good. Well, I feel like we kind of failed at our mission.
We totally did.
Totally failed.
That's right.
I was going to ask you about your shoe size, how often you go to the dentist. I was going to have, those kinds of conversations with you, but we just didn't. We just,
But I'm
I don't know
so glad
what
we
was this
failed on
episode.
this.
What was this episode about? What are we going to call it?
Um.
Instructions for living a life.
Oh. So mad props to Mary Oliver.
We've got to call it something. Can't put up a podcast episode with that title. That's a law of the universe.
Well, by the time this comes out, that problem will have been solved.
Oh,
and
really?
you can see
By
how
me.
we
Or by one of the
how we succinctly put that in.
All right. So maybe we can have maybe we have a competition who can come up with what this podcast is about. No, I don't think it's that confusing. I think in the end it's about I don't know what it's about, actually. I was going to say I knew it was about, but I don't actually.
I wonder if it's about relationships.
That sounds like we're going to talk about like dating advice.
I know. We can save that for another conversation.
I don't know that I'm qualified to give that. I don't know about you, but you have daughters, so maybe.
Oh, I do.
I don't think they're dating yet, though.
Oh no, they're 9 and 10. And
exactly. Well, I hope not. Yeah.
There's been a crush.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that'll be our topic for our next thing. We're going to talk about how to meet boys. That'll be next week's episode. Tune in.
Jack and Danny pontificating on something where they have very
Dad's telling their daughters, dad's telling their kids how to date.
That's right.
Sounds repulsive.
Oh dear.
No, we probably won't talk about that. So anyway, tune in next week to find out what we do talk about. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, complaints, comments, requests,
or if you'd like to just be in relationship with us, join the
conversation with us. Yeah, start dating us. We're available to have more connections. Just write to us at podcast@sketchbookskool.com, and we'll see what happens. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you, Danny.